once you start self-inquiry, you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. Now, this is especially important to hear, because when you start up the practice of self-inquiry, the mind finds it difficult to understand what that practice is. And the way you learn really is by listening to the instructions, being in the presence of the teacher, and then, more importantly, trying, failing, trying, failing, and then finding your way. And that can be quite a difficult process, because sometimes you try, sometimes you might have a good self-inquiry session where everything feels great, and other times it just isn't working. None of that matters. The key thing is you're trying, and that you're making the attempt to turn within, abide as the self. That's the important thing. Obviously, the more skilled you are at doing it, the better. But you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. Why? Why is this? Maybe you can think to yourselves, why is sometimes self-inquiry easier, and why is sometimes self-inquiry more difficult? It's all to do with those vasanas. Yes, you got it. A minute, some of you are going to guess what I was going to say. Those vasanas, one of my favorite words. For those of you who don't know what vasanas are, or who have forgotten what I mean when I say vasanas, vasanas is the Sanskrit word which refers to the habitual tendencies, so their habits. You can have good vasanas, you can have bad vasanas, you can have a vasana for keeping fit and eating healthily. They can be good habits. You can have vasanas for sitting on the sofa, remote control in hand. What do they say? I can't remember the phrase they use, but watching like all of Netflix, your favorite season, watching it all in like an evening, surrounded by packs of junk food and soft drinks. You can have these kinds of vasanas, yeah? Vasanas are habits, habitual tendencies. You could even say, on a sort of deeper level, actually, that other things are vasanas. For example, the physical body might have vasanas. It has a vasana to grow hair in a certain way or a certain color, you could say. And your heart's beating in a certain way. We could say these are even vasanas. Or, you know, your accent, the way you speak, that's due to your conditioning. You've got the physical conditioning. You've got the genetic conditioning. You've got the environmental conditioning. You've got the psychological conditioning. All these things affecting the expression. You see, so our genes affect the expression. Our physical environment affects the way we express ourselves. Our accent, part of that is due to the anatomy of our vocal cords, and a part of it is due to the way we're accustomed to using those vocal cords, due to the way we've been brought up and the sounds we've been hearing, and the way we imitate other people around us when we learn to speak, things like this. Now, are we concerned about your accent? Are we concerned about the color of your hair? We're not really in these teachings, you see. So we're concerned about some specific types of vasanas, which I call the egoic vasanas. And the egoic vasanas are all linked to this concept or belief. Can you think what I'm going to say? What is this concept? What is this belief? It's a false belief. There's a clue. There's a false belief that all these egoic vasanas are linked to. And that's this false belief in I am a body-mind entity. Or I am a limited entity of some kind. You might think that you're a spirit being. Yeah? You might think this or that, but if your concept has any kind of limitation to it, then that is what I mean by you believe that you are a body-mind entity. You might be a small body-mind entity, you might be a big body-mind entity. Yeah? depending on your belief system, your belief structure. If you're identified with being the body-mind, excuse me, then that's called the ego, in the way I speak about it. Sanskrit word ahankara. Ahankara means ego. Ahang means I, and kara is the verb to do. So ahankara means I do, or the doer, often translated as the ego. It's the belief I'm the body-mind. When the body-mind does something, like does this cool, very cool movement with the hands, that's, yeah, or whatever the body's doing, the ego says, I'm doing that. When you're thinking some thoughts, the ego says, I'm doing that. This is the false idea. What are we doing? Well, in the way that Ramana teaches, the way I teach, the way the Vedanta teachings teach, is a very practical way. There are other ways of teaching it, but they tend to, in my view, to be less good. So if you're going to adopt this way of thinking about things, this is my advice to you, it's going to be advantageous to you. Conceive of the self as being a non-doer. It's very important. You do nothing. You do nothing. Now, some people say, well, hang on a sec. Isn't the self everything? Doesn't the self do everything? So isn't the self thinking and speaking? But actually also, isn't the self also shining the sun and blowing the wind? Well, yes, it is. We could say that. But this is not a helpful concept. Because does that help liberate you? Well, it might give you some peace. It can do. To realize that the same power that is animating the sun and the wind and the rain and the flowers is also animating you. That is a helpful teaching. Many of you will have heard that teaching, and many of you will still be suffering. So while it's a helpful teaching, it tends not to end suffering. A more helpful view of the self is to say the self is a non-doer, not doing anything. It's always still. It's always silent. It's always peace. When we say self, when I say self, what do I mean? I mean you. I mean, it's you. This is what you always are. You are never doing anything. You're always still. At peace. And you never suffer. You never suffer. Never. You've never suffered. You've never suffered. You never will suffer, and you are not suffering now. Well, isn't this rather silly? Because don't I suffer all the time, eh? Isn't this really silly? I'm suffering here, I'm suffering there, I'm happy one moment, I think life's brilliant one moment, I'm at the top of the roller coaster, and suddenly I go down to the bottom of the roller coaster, and then I think, oh my God, my life's terrible. How am I going to deal with all this stuff? And then somehow I'll climb up again, and I'll feel better, and then it repeats itself. It just goes up and down. Thing. This is the samsara, or suffering. What do you mean I'm not suffering? I'm always at peace. I'm talking about your true self, your true nature. The idea is to know this, to realize this for yourself. So it isn't just silly words, superficial words, concepts, ideas. And this is why I recommend you adopt this way of viewing reality through the teachings. Adopt the reality that's presented to you and the concepts that are presented to you towards and by the teaching, by Ramana's teaching. by the Advaita Vedanta teachings, by what I'm sharing with you. You are the ever still self. You're constantly, you can imagine yourself, or you can imagine a deity, Krishna, Ramana, a deity, Jesus, inside your heart, in cross-legged, in divine meditation, meditation upon the divine, at peace, at rest, whole, complete, just in your heart. That is what you are already. You think you're the body-mind entity if you're ignorant. So self-inquiry is the way we turn within and abide as what we are. To abide means to stay or to rest or to live. So we stay and we claim our birthright, which is our true self, our nature. We abide as that. We live as that. We rest as that. What we are in our hearts. And through practice, the egoic vasanas disappear. I've just realized I started spouting on about this, didn't I? Because I was asking about why are some self-inquiry sessions good and some self-inquiry sessions bad, and I lost the track there. So hold on. I will answer that. Well, you see, the vasanas, the egoic vasanas, keep you interested in the world, in objects. When I say the world, I mean Maya. I mean objects. I mean body, mind, thoughts, feelings, sensations, world. That's what I mean by world. I mean all of that. Anything perceived. The egoic vasanas are constantly interested in the world. When there's no interest in the world, the ego doesn't exist anymore. So this ego is this movement of interest in objects, interest in the world, entanglement with Maya. We can say that the vasanas, the egoic vasanas, the egoic movement pulls us out of the heart, of the self. Heart means self. Pulls us out of the heart into the world. And the stronger they are, the more difficult self-inquiry will be. And the weaker the vasanas are, the easier it is to abide as the self. Because the vasanas are pulling you into the world, and self-inquiry is pulling you back into the heart. And your egoic vasanas vary. When you're very, very tired, if you're exhausted, they're not going to be so strong because you're tired. You see? If you're pumped up full of caffeine and sugar, then you might be, the egoic vasanas will be very strong. You see? If you've just been emotionally triggered by something or you're stressed out by something, then you're very, very attached to your body-mind identity, and you're very, very much interested in, and even obsessed with what's happening in the world. Much more difficult to come back into the self. So the strength of the vasanas, and which is the same thing as the strength of the ignorance, can vary. It's not always the same. The self is always the same. Vasanas can be stronger or weaker, greater or lesser. And depending on what's happening with our vasanas, it affects our ability to perform self-inquiry. And the vasanas change like the seasons. There's a pattern there, but they change. The key thing is to keep up the practice, whether you have good sessions, bad sessions. Because over time, that's what's going to reduce the vasanas. And the vasanas fight back, you see. So sometimes they make you feel like you're losing. But that's actually a sign that you're winning, because they're fighting back because they're losing, you see.